What's up, all my purple bears out there? Professor Hurley here, bringing you another episode of Purple Bear Biology. In this episode, we are going to finish our series on the endocrine system by exploring the hormones of our reproductive system. While there are a lot of cool hormones that we could focus on in our reproductive system, what I want to focus on is these 6 hormones. Now, we've talked about luteinizing hormone and follicle stimulating hormone before when we were talking about the hypothalamus and anterior pituitary gland. Progesterone, estrogen, testosterone, and prolactin are all hormones that we've kind of talked about, but briefly. So I want to look at the details today. Starting with luteinizing hormone and follicle stimulating hormone. Both of these hormones are stimulated to be released by gonadotropin-releasing hormone from the hypothalamus. Once released, the overall effect of LH and FSH is to travel to the reproductive structures, causing them to release testosterone, estrogen, and progesterone. Starting with follicle-stimulating hormone, we can see that males respond by undergoing a process called spermatogenesis, and females will release the female sex hormones, estradiol and progesterone. Supplementing FSH, luteinizing hormone in males stimulates testosterone production, while luteinizing hormone in females is a more complex interaction, triggering ovulation and turning a follicle into the corpus luteum. Now, you may be wondering, what in the world is a follicle or the corpus luteum? To understand, let's take a closer look at what a follicle and the corpus luteum actually are. To do this, let's hop into this female reproductive system, more specifically the location of the ovaries. You probably remember from high school biology or health education class that in order for a woman to get pregnant, she must release an egg from the ovaries that then travels down the fallopian tubes to the uterus for fertilization. Ideally, this ovulation process releases a single egg once per menstrual cycle. Now, when we talk about egg, what we're actually talking about is something called an ovum, and they develop inside of a structure called a follicle. When the follicle has fully matured, the egg or ovum is released from the ovary into the fallopian tube. If the egg then gets fertilized, the follicle that helped it develop will turn into a structure called the corpus luteum. Okay, so let's make sure that makes sense. The follicle is really important because it helps the developing ovum or the egg, and the corpus luteum is really important for the developing embryo if fertilization actually takes place. So that may make you wonder, why is the corpus luteum so important to the embryo? And the answer to that is it produces progesterone. And progesterone has a negative feedback on the hypothalamus and anterior pituitary that stimulate hormones like FSH and LH, which can control ovulation and the menstrual cycle. In fact, if progesterone levels are high enough, this can lead to the female missing her period altogether. One of the most important features of progesterone is that it actually prepares the uterus for accepting the newly fertilized egg. And one of those primary preparations is to ensure that the uterus does not contract while the embryo attaches to the uterine lining. Now, in addition to all of those cool things, the corpus luteum also serves as a primary structure for the new embryo to develop and maintain its connection to the mother until the placenta can fully form. Okay, so that's pretty cool, right? We got to talk about 2 primary hormones that influence our sex hormones. But now, let's transition to look into specifically our sex hormones and their target tissues. You probably all heard of estrogen and testosterone, but one thing that I wanted to make sure we all knew was that both of these hormones can be found in both sexes. So while estrogen is primarily thought of as a female sex hormone, it is found inside of males. And while testosterone is normally considered a male sex hormone, it is found inside of females. If these hormones are absent altogether, then we can have dramatic impacts on development and how people experience their world. Now, of course, don't get me wrong, just because they're there doesn't mean they're there in high concentrations. This just reiterates how important hormone concentration is, because high levels of estrogen will help an individual develop feminine characteristics, and high levels of testosterone will help an individual develop masculine features. So to better understand both of these hormones and their effects, let's take a closer look, starting with estrogen. Now technically, when we talk about active estrogen inside of the body, we're talking about a chemical called estradiol. But most people just use the word estrogen to refer to estradiol. There's a whole bunch of different estrogens that can be active, and different organisms have different forms of estrogen. There's even a plant type of estrogen that can be found inside of soy. But when we're talking about human ANP and we're talking about estrogen, we're talking about estradiol. The primary source of estrogen in females is the ovary. But because men don't have ovaries, you may be wondering, where does the estrogen come from in them? Well, it comes from our good old friend, the adrenal gland. The primary function of estrogen is to develop secondary sexual features like breast tissue, as well as help regulate the menstrual cycle. But don't forget, estrogen has an effect on men as well. Estrogen levels can have a dynamic impact on whether or not we are building bone correctly, because estrogen reduces osteoclast activity. Thus, maintaining proper estrogen levels is important to maintaining bone matrix strength and resilience. So what do you think happens when estrogen levels get too high or too low inside of the body? Well, let's start on the side where they're elevated. In females, this can cause menstrual irregularities or just a missed period altogether. Additionally, it can cause an enlargement of the uterus tissue and breast tissue. Similar effects can be seen inside of males, with high estrogen levels also leading to an enlargement of breast tissue. And this can be a key sign that there's a hormonal imbalance. Individuals with high estrogen also tend to have higher risks of obesity, heart disease, and even stroke. In males, obesity is the common cause, but in females, high estrogen levels can also be a sign of ovarian tumors. Of course, estrogen gets broken down inside of the liver too, so if your liver's not working correctly, then you can develop high estrogen levels as well. Okay, so what about on the other side? What if estrogen levels are low? Well, estrogen levels relatively between male and female are already low in males, and so low estrogen levels don't tend to be all that prevalent in males. However, in females, low estrogen levels can have a full body effect. Low estrogen levels can lead to depression, low sex drive, even things like urinary tract infections and headaches. Not to mention the fact that osteoclast activity can then skyrocket, leading to some of the more pronounced effects that we see with low estrogen levels, like osteoporosis, where the bones become porous and brittle. I wonder what might be causing estrogen levels to plummet like that. If we hop back a couple slides, we can see that hormone levels actually lower with age. Oh, and you've probably all heard of menopause before, where estrogen levels become lower as a female grows older. It's also interesting to note, while it's often discussed less, men go through a very similar reduction in sex hormone called andropause. Speaking of testosterone, let's take a look at what the effects of that hormone are. Don't forget that testosterone is what causes the body to develop more masculine features, like increased muscle mass, bone density, and even hair growth. Additionally, testosterone is responsible for the development of the male reproductive system. Most of the testosterone in males comes from the testes. However, some of it does come from the adrenal gland. In females, most of the testosterone is going to come from the adrenal gland as well. Now, I know what you're thinking. If testosterone can make the body appear more manly, what happens if levels are too high or too low? When we talk about testosterone levels being too high, oftentimes the conversation is stimulated by individuals that actually supplement their testosterone levels with anabolic steroids. Now, there are a lot of reasons that an individual would do this, but one of the primary reasons is inside of sports like bodybuilding and endurance sports. The primary reason to supplement with testosterone and other anabolic steroids is to shorten the recovery time of the muscle tissue during training. Using these steroids means that these individuals can train harder and more frequently, thus getting a competitive edge over their opponents. However, prolonged use of high levels of anabolic steroids does come with a cost. Individuals that continue to use these drugs may have to deal with side effects, including things like high blood pressure, liver damage, even mood swings, and infertility. Now, while we're talking about high testosterone, it's not always through supplementation. Of course, there could always be a tumor in either a male or a female associated with cells that synthesize testosterone. And in females, there's also a syndrome called Polycystic ovary syndrome that can lead to elevated testosterone levels. The effects of PCOS is in the end a reduction in estrogen and elevation in testosterone. The reason this happens is because follicles inside the ovary develop into fluid-filled cysts that do not release an ovum. The lack of ovum releasal all leads to a reduction in estrogen levels. With the inability to maintain estrogen concentrations, the body tries to stimulate sex hormone production. The result is that testosterone levels become elevated and the patient experiences symptoms of high testosterone. High testosterone levels in females can lead to unwanted hair growth, irregular periods, acne, and even difficulties conceiving. Low testosterone levels tend to be a problem primarily for males. Decreased T levels can lead to fatigue, depression, weight gain, and even risk of developing more brittle bones. Though there are a plethora of different reasons that testosterone levels could be low inside of males, the most common causes tend to be either excess estrogen levels, some genetic predisposition, or the aging factor that we talked about earlier. Okay, so we've talked about FSH, LH, estrogen, aka estradiol, and testosterone as well as progesterone. What could be left? Well, we've got one more hormone left to discuss, and that is prolactin. Prolactin actually gets secreted from the hypothalamus anterior pituitary connection, and it works in conjunction with the other hormone that we've learned previously called oxytocin. Together, both of these hormones help to enable a mother to breastfeed. We previously talked about how oxytocin is released to stimulate milk letdown at the breast when the baby is suckling. It's an awesome positive feedback loop that enables the baby to feed. However, prolactin is the hormone that enables the mother to produce milk in the first place. So prolactin stimulates the production of milk, and oxytocin stimulates the release of milk during breastfeeding. All right, y'all. So that's going to wrap up this video. We had the cool opportunity to discuss sex hormones inside of our bodies, as well as some other kinds of cool effects that exist when these hormones are not at their homeostatic set points. Don't forget that while we discuss these hormone concentrations and syndromes or diseases with specific genders, all of these hormones actually exist inside both males and females. It's the concentration of those hormones that makes a difference and determines how our body will respond ultimately at the target tissue. If you found the video helpful, be sure to hit the like button and share it so that somebody else can view it as well. If you have any questions, be sure to drop them down in the comment section below. And I look forward to our next conversation where we'll get to move into blood in our body. As always, thank you all for watching and see y'all next time. What? You're still here? That's it. That's all. That's the end of the video. Okay, I might have a couple more slides. You made it to the end of the endocrine system. Congratulations. I hope you now have a more comprehensive understanding of the endocrine system overall. Now, you may be wondering, what in the world am I supposed to do with all of this information? I thought you'd never ask. Now's the time to learn it. Now's the time to make sure that you can apply it. The endocrine system is one of the most fascinating systems in the whole body. However, if you don't learn it now, it will come back to haunt you later in anatomy and physiology. So instead of running from it when you see it down the hall, I want you to embrace it like an old friend. So go forth, study, learn, ask questions, and as always, see y'all next time.